I was an aerospace engineer in Denver, Colorado during the last years of the Cold War, the 1980s, and it was when the famous brown cloud was inundating Denver, and we couldn't all drive on the same days. We had to carpool on different days. And one day I went to an engineer friend's house to do my carpool for that week, and I got there a little early. And I'd never been to his house before, and I said, "Can I use your bathroom?" And I went in there, and he had little Post-it notes of affirmations all over the bathroom, and it said, "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." We got in his car, and he had little Post-it notes all over the dashboard and the rearview mirror. "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." And of course, I knew what his office looked like, and it was the same way. He had them all over the walls in the CRT. I said, "Does this affirmation work for you?" He said, "Nah." He said, "It never does." And I said, "Why do you think that is?" And he said, well, look at me. Who'd want to be with somebody like me? I'm just an engineer. You know, he had a very low self-esteem about himself. And I began to think about the way that he was applying those affirmations, and other people have applied them very successfully. And what I found the difference was, for him, it was a thought process that never went beyond what was happening in his mind, in his own picturing, his own self-esteem. And the thought is important. The ancients are very clear about this in the Sanskrit text. They tell us that the thought is the image of the quantum possibility. So in other words, in the realm of all possibilities, everything already exists. My friend's perfect relationship and the worst one he'll ever have. The lightest of the light, the darkest of the dark. Our greatest healing and our greatest suffering, they're already there. And what they invite us to do in these ancient traditions is to reach into those possibilities with our mind. This is the power of the mind. And isolate, we lock in one of those possibilities. So now we have taken it and identified it. However, to bring it into this world, to breathe life into that possibility, is the power of human emotion, our love for that possibility, or our fear of that possibility. Either one will work. To bring that quantum possibility into the particle reality of our everyday lives. We don't have to know that. It sounds very technical. We just have a feeling. But this is the science of, appears to be the science of how these things are working. So this is why our self-esteem is so important. When we feel, when my engineer friend felt that, why would anybody want to be with me, is what he said to me. The affirmation for him was an empty affirmation. It was a thought that had no energy to invite it into this world. And an example of just the opposite of that is I know of other people who have simply made a list of all of the attributes of a perfect partner in life, because this is what many people, I'm using as an example. It works in healing, it works in peace, but we're talking about relationships. They make a list of all those attributes, and then they come from the place that relationship is already happening. What is their life like? How is their life different now that perfect partner is there? How is their evening different? How do they spend their time differently? How do they feel when they wake up in the morning and share their lives with someone? And it's those feelings that they live throughout the day. It's not something you sit down and do for a minute and then you get up and walk away. Rather, it's something that we become. We live our lives as if these experiences have already happened, and in that way we invite them into our lives, and they happen frighteningly quickly for some people. It's amazing. I know people that haven't finished their list, and they go out for lunch or a cup of coffee while they're making the list, and the person that just brought them their lunch is the person that's on that list, and they fall in love and they're married 20 years later. I know people that's happened to. So it's about clarity. It's about specificity. It's about being personal. Being very clear that these are personal desires. Scientifically, it appears that this field, the divine matrix, it is a mirror and a bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. And it can only give us what we give it to work with. And the interesting thing is that we have been conditioned to feel the feelings of the things that we don't want in life and that we're afraid of. We wake up in the morning and we see the 6 o'clock news and all the things to be afraid of, and then we go through our day saying, oh, I hope I'm not going to see that today, or I hope it's not around the corner. And my question, so fascinating me, where do we learn to feel the things that we don't want rather than things that we choose to have? And how would our lives be different if we could cut through all of the static and simply choose in our lives what we would like each moment of each day, or our relationships, or our abundance, or our careers, or the peace in our families to look like? What would what would our lives look like if we could do that? And there's very good scientific evidence showing precisely what our lives would look like because we would very quickly experience everything that we've created. As a scientist, one of the first things I had to understand, and again, my training, I was trained in the hard sciences, and there was no allowance for any inner experience to have an effect on our outer world to begin with. Number two, I was raised in a relatively conservative community in the Midwest. I was born in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. Excuse me, in that part of the world, when you talk about emotions, they kind of get lumped into this nebulous experience. So, thoughts, feelings, emotions are all the same thing. We really don't talk about them much. And by the way, as a male, we don't want to see much of yours. So that was my upbringing. So I began to understand when we go into the other cultures, and I'm referring again and again to this wisdom. We had this wisdom in Western cultures, and it was lost in the 4th century. About 1,700 years ago, it was edited right out of our most cherished spiritual and religious traditions, the biblical edits of the 4th century. It was not edited from the other cultures that we've visited, and that's the value of going into these cultures. And they identify 3 separate yet related experiences that we all have in our bodies, and they literally call them thought, feeling, and emotion. And here's the difference. The thinking they identify with the 3 upper energy centers of the body. The Sanskrit traditions have a 7 energy center or 7 chakra system that they work with. And they say the upper 3 are related to what we call thought or logic processes. So when we think about something, we picture it in our mind, that perfect relationship or peace between nations. But we can only invite it into our lives when we breathe the power of emotion into that thought. The emotion comes from the lower 3 of those creative centers in our bodies. So when we breathe the power of emotion into our thought, we imbue that thought with life. And those 2 energies meet in the one center that is not accounted for yet in our model. It's in our heart, or what scientists call the 7-layer liquid crystal oscillator in the center of our chest. But we'll just call it our heart, because that's what it does. Our heart is creating electrical and magnetic waves that are influencing the world around us based on what we think and the emotion that we breathe into those thoughts to create the feeling. So now we've just defined feeling. Feeling, by definition, from the Sanskrit tradition, is the union of thought and emotion. It creates the feeling. Now what makes this really interesting is that those traditions say we are capable of only 2 primary emotions: love and whatever we feel the opposite of love is. And when you get really deep into the teachings, there are 2 aspects of the same thing. But what they say is when we have our thought, we are either breathing the love of that thought or our fear of that thought to create the feeling, and the feeling then becomes sadness or joy or compassion or anger. Those are not emotions, those are feelings. Now, for some people, they say, well, you're nitpicking. What difference could it make? And these are the subtle differences between these ancient ways of viewing this inner technology. It's literally a technology, because we can have the same thought or the same affirmation and imbue it with a different emotion and have completely different feelings and create a different outcome. And this is the great secret that was edited out of our Christian and pre-Christian, Judeo-Christian traditions. When 45 books were removed in the 4th century, 20 were taken out completely. Another 25 were condensed and rearranged. And we know this because we found the information now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic, the Gnostic texts. So we know what those texts would have said if we had had them. But the interesting thing is, without those texts, we tend to rely upon the written word, the validation, to feel